have Dr. Orbach, Professor Emeritus from Duke University, and he's here to talk about some climate adaptation work that he's doing in the Gulf of Mexico area. And then, because we're an international school, he's going to kind of help, tell us kind of lessons learned for the international context. And as you all know, there's just tremendous amount of work being done there for two reasons. One, obviously, there was the Hurricane Katrina and all the aftermath of that, and all the work on ecological restoration and big infrastructure. And then obviously there's also huge new money because of the Deepwater Horizon spill. And so there's just really the kind of the hotbed of ecological thinking and new planning in the whole Gulf region. And so with Dr. Orbach's expertise, we'll get a good view of that right now. And so let's give him a warm welcome.
Thanks, Jason. Just as a little bit more of an introduction, I'm an economist and cultural anthropologist by training, which when I was director of the Duke Marine Lab, people would say, "You're a what? You're where? What's going on here?" I was appointed in the School of the Environment at Duke, which is very broadly interdisciplinary, and it does a lot of work in conservation, conservation policy, conservation advocacy. And of course, conservation is always about people. It's not about the fish, not about the grass and the water, it's about people, human behavior, human values, and how those are expressed in rules, public policy, private incentive programs that encourage us or make us act in a certain way that's more or less conservation oriented. So what I do as a social scientist is to bring in the whole what's called human dimension side. So my colleague Larry Crowder, who you're going to hear from next month, he and I were partners in crime at Duke for many years. Before we both moved out here. He studied the fish and I studied the fishermen, and then together we go make public policy. And the other thing about me is that I was a professor of the practice of marine affairs and policy, which is a category that was created at Duke for people in the medical school and the law school who actually were practitioners but who wanted to bridge the gap between the university and the real world, so to speak. And so I spent most of my time actually outside of the university, actually building public policy through mostly community action, bottom-up public policy. Fisheries, oil and gas, coastal planning, coastal protection, those kinds of things. So that's where I come from to all this. Now what I'm going to do tonight is to talk about three things. One is the general situation with respect to climate change, and in particular sea level rise, and a little bit about how that kind of issue is treated around the world. But then I'm going to bring it quite quickly home here, a little bit to California, but mostly straight to Louisiana. I have had a really interesting privilege of being on something called the Science and Engineering Board for the state of Louisiana, which is advising the state on developing their coastal master plan, which I will talk to you about in some detail. And I want to go a little bit, how many of you are students in here? Right, for you students, we're going to make a little sausage tonight. How do you make this sausage? And your advisor, what the hell does that mean? What do you do? Do they pay you? How do you get on this thing? What do they do? I'll talk a little bit about that, just so you get a sense of kind of the inner workings of how Louisiana is reacting to mostly Hurricane Katrina, but now also climate change. And at the end, I'll bring it back up to some general points about the whole process. The two major demographic trends in the world today are movement to coasts and movement to cities. It's been happening for at least 100 years since the Industrial Revolution in a big way. It's going to continue. It's not going to stop anytime in the near future. Now, why people move from lovely little idyllic country villages in rural Mexico to go to barrios in Mexico City is not entirely clear, but it's happening. It's happening all over the world. It's happening with Shanghai. It's happening with every major city in the world and essentially all the coasts of the world. Now, the problem with this is that leads to increased coastal development, but facing sea level rise, which I'll talk more about in a minute, this is the big train wreck waiting to happen. People moving to the coast, the ocean's rising. FAMO, it's going to happen. Not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's a matter of when and how fast it's going to happen. The 30 largest cities in the world, mega cities, over 20 million metropolitan populations, of the 30 of those, 20 of them are in low-lying coastal areas, right? Thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of small towns and cities in low-lying areas. Many of them not on what we would call a coast. So for example, the city of Houston. If you've ever been to Houston, it's an hour, maybe hour and a half drive from the Gulf of Mexico, but it's in that low-lying coastal plain. The city of Houston is only on average 2 feet above mean sea level. Okay, with 1 meter of sea level, Houston is underwater, even though it's not considered a coastal town or coastal city. Right? Same thing is true with the Nile Valley in Egypt, for example. And billions of hectares of what I call natural infrastructure. Fringe swamps, mangrove, forests, that historically, when sea level has gone up and down, it's gone up and down hundreds of meters in geologic time, these fringe environments will simply move up and down with the sea level. What's the problem now, though? Who's in the way? We are, especially with our infrastructure. Okay? Now we can think about how to make that not quite so bad in the future if we think about it the right way, but we have to think about that as well as what's going to happen to people. Now this is new to human society because never before in modern human history have we had a period of significant sea level rise. So we don't know essentially what to do. So here's the history. And what you see here is that here's the last glacial maximum here, the last little ice age about 22,000 years ago. Starts to melt. There are a couple of pulses where it melts faster for reasons that are still not totally well understood. But then right about here, about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, it evens off and essentially stays constant. Now, if you know your history, this is the period where humans started building our infrastructure in a serious way. So basically, all of our infrastructure, and in particular, the coastal infrastructure, has been built in a time of constant sea level. Okay? And we assumed up until very recently, as societies worldwide, that the sea was going to stay where it is. That's been the operating assumption. And what's more important, all of our law and policy about public trust waters and private property, what happens when something's inundated, is based on the old Roman civil law, which assumes a constant sea level. That's not going to be true. We're not only going to have to move, we're going to have to revise our total edifice of law and policy about riparian issues sometime in the next couple of decades. This is not far off. Now, most of the predictions from the IPCC and other people say sea level rise will be between 1 and 2 meters by 2100. Every time we get new information, that seems to go up, and it seems to go up faster. Right? Now, the way I say this is, what the effect is, go to the place where you live near the water and go down at high tide and get right at the edge of the water and turn around and look at the land. Everything above your eyesight is underwater in 100 years. Permanently underwater. Try that in Monterey. See what happens. And because of the time scales and large scale of Earth systems, we cannot do anything about that. So even if we all start acting like Al Gore wants us to tomorrow, driving Priuses, or I have a little hybrid, we've done one car now, we have a hybrid, it doesn't matter. Sea level is still going to rise between 1 and 2 meters by 2100. We cannot stop what we're doing fast enough. Now, should we change our behavior? Yes, but it's not going to help this problem in the next 100 years. Okay? If anybody wants to dispute that, this is going to be fun. We'll do it after. Now here are a couple of pictures of what some of this might look like. You know what the upper left is? Manhattan Island. Now this is at 4 meters. This is at 4. The other thing is, by the way, when they say a meter or 2 by 2100, it's not going to stop. It's going to keep going, depending on a number of factors. My guess is up to at least 4 or 5, maybe 10 meters. And if the Greenland ice cap goes away, then it's 20 meters, right? Okay. So, lower right is Florida. There's the big red area right here is Lake Okeechobee, which is now kind of in the middle of Florida. All of this red is underwater in Florida, and this is at 5 meters now. This, however, is South San Francisco Bay. This is the San Francisco Airport right here. Actually, it's right up just above here. I'll show you a picture of it later. At 1 meter. And all this is the South Bay, San Francisco. How many of you have been to Hawaii, Waikiki Beach? Waikiki in Hawaii. Well, this is Waikiki, the Royal Hawaiian, Big Pink Hotel's right here. I keep my surfboard right here for when I'm over there. Thanks. This is the LOI Canal here, right? And this is the area that's underwater at 1 meter. By the way, this right here is the edge of the Honolulu wastewater treatment plant. For the whole city of Honolulu, which is underwater. Okay? So this is kind of the scale of things here. Anybody recognize, well, there's some hints here, where this is? Venezia. Yeah, this is Venice. Yeah. Right, in the city of Venice. The upper left is, if anybody been to Venice, you know where that is in the upper left? Yeah, what is that? Where is that?
Is that St. Mark's?
St. Mark's Square. St. Mark's Square in Venice, which is underwater quite commonly at relatively normal high tide. It's actually the lowest point in Venice. Now, I could show you pictures like this from all around the world. One of the things that my prediction is we will try to engineer our way out of this for a while. And then we'll realize that in most places we actually can't do that. And I'll talk about more when we get to Louisiana. But one of the engineering solutions, and this is called the MOSE project, the Modulo Sperimentale Electromagnetico, which is a series of panels that are steel, hollow steel in concrete casings that are hinged right here. And these are being installed on the 3 major inlets in the Venice Lagoon here. There's Venice right at the top of the lagoon. And essentially what they're going to try to do is to stop the sea from rising on high tides in the whole Venice Lagoon. Right? Now, this started out in 2003, the designs. It was projected to cost there are 50 some of these panels here like this. Started off, it was projected to cost $1.7 billion. It's now estimated, it's supposed to be finished and operational in June of 2018, so it took 15 years to do this. It's Italy, right? Along the way, you may have read about this, the mayor of Venice got arrested for skimming $20 million off the top of all this. Get by it. So, now I was on a panel with the engineer who designed this, and I kind of said to him offline, I said, when y'all were designing this, did you take into account sea level rise? And he said, well, no, because we kind of started before people were thinking about that, but we've recalculated and we figure it may work up to 1 meter of sea level rise. Okay? Being honest about this whole thing. So this is a potential engineering solution. It's not clear it's going to work at all, by the way. Okay. Now, the most famous example of defended coastline is the Netherlands. So here you have the red are the dikes and barriers. These are the southern barriers here, of which this is one. We have floodgates that go up and down. It actually has worked pretty well since the Second War. They had some floods right after the Second War in the early 50s. And as my wife and I discovered on a trip to the Netherlands with Marshall Plan money, they built these barriers. And so they have fairly well protected their land. However, 40% of the Netherlands is below sea level. Right? And they build up the area called polders. And the polar areas are these brown areas here. And they built them up after they put in the barriers. And they have farms and little towns and things on them now, if you visited there. Well, they have a new plan, I'll refer to it right at the end, called Living with Water. And I'll tell you what they're planning to do with their Living with Water plan. Now this, by the way, the lower left and the lower right and middle, are the wonderful little town of Emden, Germany, which is right here. And the town of Emden, Germany, including their harbor that you see here, is 5 meters above mean sea level. because they have dikes that were built up in the Middle Ages to keep the nasty Frisians from the west from attacking them, and they would flood these defenses. And the artifact is the whole city, is where all your Volkswagens are shipped out to the US from, is through a series of locks is 5 meters above mean sea level. They have actually engineered their way out of at least a couple hundred years of this, right? No, not that I think they have relation. Now, coming back home to a case we're going to talk about quite a bit, this is, of course, New Orleans after the flood. And the city of New Orleans, their problem is this. Here's Lake Pontchartrain, here's the Mississippi River, here is where the city of New Orleans is. The average, on average, New Orleans is 6 feet below mean sea level, okay? Or the mean level of the water in the Mississippi and Lake Pontchartrain. So this is a problem. This is where, after Hurricane Katrina. And if they have a whole series of dikes all around southern Louisiana. And if you drive along on this road here, and you can't quite see it too well in this picture, but these dikes are about 10 meters high. So you're driving along a road, and you can drive for miles down by Lafourche or the Mississippi River Delta, and there'll be these dikes, and you'll look up 30 feet above you and see a 600-foot freighter going by. 30 feet above you. You know, that's the clue. Right? So, maybe it's like a storm, it's just like a flood, right? Comes and goes. We know about flooding, that happens hurricanes, everybody cleans up. No, it's permanent change of state. It's not going to go away. Floods will be on top of the rising sea level. Okay? Now, bringing it back closer to home, here's a little Twin Lakes in Santa Cruz on a high tide, a storm here. This is Balboa Island, where I grew up, down at Newport Beach, and spent some time. This is on a normal, what we call king tide, the highest tides in the spring and the fall here. This is what Balboa Island, a tiny little community, all the houses cost more than $2 million. This is what it looks like because the storm drains at the end of the streets back up and flood the whole town now. Okay? They recently led a $9 million contract to try, some engineers try to figure out how they're going to deal with this. And they don't know anything yet. Closer to home here, this is Santa Cruz. This is the FEMA flood map, Virgin Federal Emergency Managed States flood map. And all this blue area is the area that's in federal flood zone, which is defined as about 1 meter. So if you know Santa Cruz at all, this is the whole downtown Santa Cruz. Here's the City Hall, Pacific Avenue is right here where all the stores are. This is underwater at 1 meter, okay, in Santa Cruz. Luckily, there's a lot of high ground right around here that people can move to. This again is San Francisco Bay. Here's a better shot of the airport at 1 meter. Okay? All right, now that we have a sense of the problem, let's move to Louisiana. Here is one estimate of how things might change in Louisiana. The red is 1 foot of sea level rise. The tan, whatever that is 2 feet. The yellow is essentially a meter, right, 3.3. Grand Isle, historically, is a tourism and fishing community down here at the end of the road. How many of you have ever been to South Louisiana? No, so you've been to Grand Isle?
I'm from.
Oh, you're from, okay, very nice. So you can hold my feet to the fire, all of it. So what you see is, so here's New Orleans here, Baton Rouge is up here. There is more Louisiana over here, not too much, and there's not a lot of population over there. But this is mostly going to be underwater in probably less than 100 years. And so, in 2005, in August, there was Hurricane Katrina. In December, only a couple months later, this was lightning public policy time, as Jason knows here. The legislature passed a new act, Act number 8, and it provided for something called a comprehensive master plan for a stable coast. Now, this is not a coastal zone management plan under the Coastal Zone Management Act, which doesn't control very much at all. California controls more than most, and we still don't control that here. This controls everything. So this master plan, all state agencies are subject to this master plan, whatever's in this master plan. And the first one was actually, and I put in the, I'll leave this with you, by the way, just so they have these websites. So if you want to see the whole plan, the whole planning process, please go to these websites here for this more in-depth information. The first of these plans actually came out in 2012, and it was pretty much a conceptual plan. It says, yeah, we ought to be doing a lot of stuff. But then the provision is, the way they did this is they restructured one of their existing authorities, the State Wetland Conservation Authority, into the Coastal Protection CPRA. They charged it with developing this master plan to be updated every 5 years. Okay? And the authority is to consider both responsibility, hurricane protection and protection, conservation, restoration, enhancement of coastal and barrier shorelines or reefs, further define the coastal area as the Louisiana coastal zone and contiguous areas. And as you're going to see in a couple minutes, there's a lot of contiguous area, especially with sea level rise. Now, this is not just about protection, it's supposed to be about adaptation. And part of the problem is moving from one of those to the other. Right? I'll get back to that later. But the plan considers all biological aspects, the water quality, the shrimp, the fish, and all of the human infrastructure, and the way Louisiana fits into the rest of the world, actually being an incredibly important port on this river. Now the plan itself has these 5 objective areas: flood protection, the protection of natural processes, so a biophysical standard, protection of coastal habitats, biophysical standard for living creatures, the protection of cultural heritage. One of the big problems being, should people be able to stay where they've always lived? Well, that's just not going to be possible. And the protection of a working coast, like what do you do with the Port of New Orleans when sea level rises a certain amount? Even if you protect the coast, how do you get to it? Right? But these are the areas of the plan objectives. And I want to emphasize here, this is an incredibly complicated thing. Now, I really was pleased when they asked me to be on the science and engineering board, which is, by the way, totally composed of people from outside of the state of Louisiana. No offense. So that we won't have any political ties to anybody in Louisiana, so we can really give honest opinions about things without any repercussions of them, which is a great deal of fun, must say. And it is a huge, huge process, largely funded, as Jason mentioned, by the Deepwater Horizon funds. So this is the way they organize their plan objectives. Now the structure is that there's an authority. I think it's 20 members. A lot of the state agency heads are on it, so on and so forth. This is created by the statute. Then there's a planning team, which is being run by one of the Water Resources Institutes in Louisiana. They have a lot of very good universities in Louisiana. And on the one side are stakeholders, floodplain managers, planners, NGOs, citizens, anybody who's actually not in the government itself. Then there are a lot of advisory groups. There's a state steering committee, a committee that helped them conceptualize what they were going to do really under the law, focus groups of all of these different kinds of people here. There's the engineering board that I'm on, a flood risk subcommittee, various other technical advisory committees on predictive models, a lot of modeling going on with all this stuff. More biophysical and socioeconomic, unfortunately, that we're going to try to fix that. So this is the basic structure. We'll get back to this in more detail later. It's a lot of people in a lot of places that somebody has to get together on this really statewide, essentially, master plan for the coast. The closest thing to this happening in the history of the United States are probably the river basin commissions from years ago and the national estuary programs that tried to do something like this, to get everybody in a watershed together and how to make policy for that watershed. This is the most recent attempt and the most comprehensive legislative-based attempt to do this anywhere in the country. There's a process, and this is just for the update of the plan. They started in earnest in March of 16, doing modeling, developing the projects. And the plan, by the way, consists mostly of infrastructure projects, mostly something called diversions that I'll get back to in a minute. There's a whole what's called planning tool that the RAND Corporation is putting together for us to put everything into one big optimality sort of model of things. Comparing the alternatives that come out of that model, the final plan, which is supposed to be released in April of 2017. And the Louisiana, the Science and Engineering Board, has been meeting every 2 or 3 months for this whole time now. Now, this is all being done under an adaptive management framework. They have a whole section of the plan that talks about the concept of adaptive management. You don't just set something up and go away. You realize you have to change things as new things come on board, and be added information, the storms, whatever it is. And so they have a whole complicated thing and they are doing quite a bit for outreach and engaging the stakeholders in this process as well. So it's not just a top-down process. Now, one of the core concepts here is the concept of environmental scenarios. So the scenarios here are the low scenario, and the easiest type sea level rise is what if, so the scenarios are low, medium, and high. That's in the new plan. The old plan just had moderate and less optimistic. We went through this whole thing of what to call this stuff. And so the factors they take into account are precipitation, evaporation, transpiration, sea level rise, subsidence, and of course Louisiana is a problem of subsidence, largely due to the oil and gas industry. Predicted storm frequency, which is predicted to be less and less over time. This is in keeping with general climate models. And average storm intensity, which is predicted to go up. So just quickly, sea level rise, the low scenario is 1.5 feet, the medium is 2 feet, the high is just under 3 feet. That's not good enough, but in the 2012 plan, only a couple of years ago, the moderate scenario was under 1 foot, and the less optimistic was 1.5 feet. So in fact, there's been almost a doubling of the prediction in just 5 years between these two plans. There's good news, that's going in the right direction. Now it's probably only 50% of what it should be, but this is the way systems like this work. You got to keep pressure on, and they move incrementally, right? So subsidence, you see, goes from 20% to 50%. Storm frequency goes down. Intensity goes up by 50%. Okay. This is, by the way, over 50 years now. This is a 50-year plan, moving 50-year plan. So this is the sort of matrix that we're looking at all these things in the plan. Now, the main thing that's in the plan so far, and vastly, I think it's 80% of the money will be spent on, are these things called diversions. And the problem is this. Historically, the delta of the Mississippi River went from almost Cameron, Louisiana, just off the map here, to Biloxi, Mississippi, which is right over here. This whole thing was the meandering estuary, essentially, which was the floodplain of the Mississippi River. But when the Europeans came, one of the things they did for commerce was to channelize the river. This is what those big, what they call it? Yeah, levees are for, right? And so they go all the way from here. I actually drove all the way down to here once. And I was at the end of the road that you could drive down to, like Venice. You know, Venice is, there's nothing Venice. And so I drove out the end of the road just to say I'd been there. And this huge frog strangler storm comes in. Black clouds, and man, just kabam! 5-6 inches of rain in a couple of hours. And so I had turned the car around and I realized that the road had disappeared. And the land I could see was a couple of miles away. Now, what had happened is the Gulf because there's so much water that come down and there's a series of barrier islands out here, so it can't immediately all go away, the sea had risen above all the land I was on. Now luckily there were some posts along the side of the road. And I had an approximate memory of how far the posts were from the road. And so I drove very slowly up the road, back this couple of miles, and got higher again. But that's what a lot of this area is like. Okay? But I digress. So the river was channelized, the levees and the bulkheads came into it. And one of the things that did was to starve this whole delta area of sediment. Not only of water, but of sediment. And so in fact, the subsidence of the land is due not just to the oil and gas being taken out from below it, but the land has been eroded and not replenished because the sediment used to come down the river, and it's a lot of sediment in the Mississippi River, no longer spreads out from the Mississippi River to this area and the Atchafalaya over here to this area. So that's actually increased the land loss, the channelization of the Mississippi River. So the idea of the diversions is that they're going to build these diversions and divert water out to the sides of the river, and with it its attendant sediment. Right? This is the big idea about this. Now, none of these diversions here will go into populated areas. They're actually all intended to protect natural habitat like wetlands. So there will still be wetlands there as opposed to simply open water. There are a lot of areas down in West Bay, way down here, where there used to be what they call dead man's marsh, because the marsh grass was so high that people would get lost in it and they never find their way out. That's all now totally open to sea, right? Just because of the changes in the last couple of decades. So the idea with these diversions is they're going to divert all this water and sediment. Now, one good news story of all of this is that when I started on the CPRA 2 years ago, they were planning to fund 4 of these diversions with this money from Deepwater Horizon. These 2 here and these 2 here. Right? Last year, with some advice from us and some of their other technical committees, the CPRA, the big authority, voted to not do the lower ones. And the reason is, you're going to show you how much they cost in a minute. The reason is, people told them, you're going to spend a lot of money, and it's all going to be underwater anyway. And so in fact, they got it. And the CPRA said, okay, we're not going to do these 2. And they're focusing on these 2 up here now. Now, the plan proceeds by a whole set of these model outputs. And so here is, the red is land loss. So New Orleans is right up here, Baton Rouge is up here, here's the end of the Mississippi River. This is called the Bird's Foot down here, the Mississippi River comes up. This is the land loss, and they've got futures, they displayed this as futures without action and futures with action. And tremendous amount of work on it in doing this. So this is, the red is land loss under the low scenario that you saw in the matrix. This is land loss under the medium scenario. This is land loss under the high scenario. So this is the kind of rubric, is without action, with action, low, medium, high environmental scenarios. Okay, that's the sort of lay of the land here. Now, so here, and they've done the modeling for land loss, for vegetation, for effect on shrimp, for effect on sea trout, for effect on bird life. They've really done a really complete job, as much as the science can bear, which is not a lot in some cases actually. So the models have a chance of outrunning the science here, which is going to be a problem, as many of you know. But they've made a good attempt to try and do this. So this is a model that shows that the red is salt marsh, the blue is water, of course, gray is upland area, floating marsh, fresh forest, freshwater marsh, intermediate, so on and so forth. And these are just different variants of their planned combinations of different diversions of things that difference do. But you can see they've done this for the whole area here. Now this is the future without action for the high scenario. And what you see, let me go back for a minute. So, okay, so this is the future without action in year 10, so 10 years from 2017. And so you see what the lay of land is here, right? This is, looking particularly for the red, which is salt marsh, both of these, right? Solid red salt marsh. Now here's what happens under the high scenario. And you see there's a lot less salt marsh. Let me go back again. And a lot of this fresh forest here turns to light green, right? So this is the future without action. This is if you did nothing. Here's what will likely happen in year 10 to this vegetation. And that's a pretty considerable difference, right? Okay. All right. This is the future without action in the high scenario. And you see there's almost nothing left down here. Grand Isle is gone in both of these variants here. Oh, hang on a second. I'm going to go through these. Okay, so here's year 10, future without action. Here's your 10 and 20, future without action. You see just simply open bays here. No more barrier islands at all. This is your 30 without action. And again, remember the high scenario is probably a low estimate for the high scenario, right? So this is year 30, year 40, and year 50. Essentially, the coastal Louisiana, as we know it now, is gone. Sorry. You don't live in Holman, do you? You live in Holman?
My dad grew up there. That's where some of my family lives.
Too bad. Holman was right back. So this is the future without action. Now, I'll tell you what I'm showing you this in there. So here is assuming the mid-Barataria diversion, which is one of the two diversions they're going to do, right? So, and this is future without action and future with action. That is, if they put this diversion in along with various other things. Now what you see is there are some changes, but the overall structure of the blue, non-blue doesn't change very much. What happens is, without action, the red area here, which is salt marsh, turns to brackish marsh, right, instead. And so there are some significant differences, but the structure of blue versus non-blue stays pretty much the same. Here's what happens under the high scenario at year 50 for the future without action and the future with action. There's only one noticeable difference, and that is the diversion is right here. It's this little black line. So the point is, excuse me, this is the low scenario. 50-year vegetation, the change is not very, the change of blue, non-blue is not very great, but there's a change in what some of the vegetation is in the future with action. But by the time you go to the high scenario, it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Now, these two diversions here, one of them is estimated, this is the various components, to cost $1.3 billion, the other is $696 million. It'll probably be double that if and when they build them. Right? Where would this money come from? Well, it comes from the Restore Act, right, which is funded largely by the Deepwater Horizon penalties, the Clean Water Act. I'll get back to this in a minute. And here you can see where the money goes for. This is part of what they're planning on funding this with. Now, I'm going to switch. Here comes to the sausage part. This is a day in the life of a science and engineering board member. And so here we're going to go to so we meet again every couple of months, and we get huge amounts of material before we come to these meetings. And so we're always welcomed by Kareem, who's a wonderful fellow who's kind of in charge of the whole thing. They give us internet, that's nice. And so here are the kinds of things that are on our agenda. They give us updates on the outreach and engagement, on the socioeconomics, what they're planning with the document. Swamp is one of their big models for the biophysical things. We always have wonderful group dinners. It's not New Orleans, Baton Rouge ain't bad for food. So we typically have these 2.5-day meetings. Second day, update on the scenarios, the risk conditions. They got 9 million models here. The planning tool, how is everything coming together? This is what the RAND is, David's the RAND Foundation. And then we have a little closed door session to provide our input, good or bad, to the, hopefully always constructive, to the CPRA planning people. And then the next day, we don't get out of the room until we give them our report. And so we've learned, some of us were, some of us weren't, learned to become quick writers, right? Because they say, and by the way, they're paying us all to do this. And so we write the report, give it to them before we walk out of the room. Now we have an opportunity to revise it later once we've gotten their comments and things like that. But we produce our report right there. And the reports have been fairly critical, constructively critical, we hope, along the way, and remain so. We've now started talking about what they should do with the 2022 plan, because we realized it's too late to do anything for the 2017 plan. It's just too late. They can't do it. Even if they want to do it, they can't really change anything now. So we're already talking about the 2022 plan. So this is the kind of thing that we go through. So they review things for us. They show us, they seem to be intent on showing us how complicated it really is, right? And so this is a larger diagram of the one I showed you earlier. Here's the governor issues executive orders. Here's the CPRA board. Here's the master plan. Here's all the local planning in the coastal sector, the oil spill people, the state coordinators, the regulatory agencies, the federal government, blah, blah, blah. And so they're so nice, they broke it down. They said, we realize it's so complicated, so let's start simple. Here's the middle of the diagram. And they go on about this for an hour. And then they say, now here you add in something, and go on about that. And then here's some more. Now, I, as a public policy person, love this. I have to tell you, the biophysical scientists are snoring. Okay. Now, I think it's actually pretty good. And so they go through all of this stuff for us. And I'm going to zoom through some of this stuff. They've done these opinion polls, which says, yes, we care about our coast. They have a new governor. I don't know. Now, I'm not going to be as political as Jason, but let's just say Bobby Jindal was not my kind of guy. Their new guy's more my kind of guy. Right? I won't say our kind of guy. And they like that. They think this is a good idea. So they go off those opinion things. They go through their whole outreach and engagement thing for us. They tell us how they're doing everything. They have their own timeline for outreach and engagement. They told us how wonderful they thought John the Letter was going to be. They talk about how the legislators look at these things. In Louisiana, they call counties parishes, right? So this is how you engage the parishes. They've got all these meetings with everybody all over the place, and they tell us all about that kind of stuff. They show us how they're planning to show the public these things in visuals to get our input on whether it makes sense to do it this way, which is nice. We're happy to help them with that. And they give those examples of this. Now, I'm going to go back one here. So what this shows is the different kinds of projects that are in this plan. This symbol is diversions. And so here you see the diversions, the two they decided not to do, the two they're going to do, the other ones that are on the drawing boards. There are other diversions farther up the river. There are diversions down here with the Chapalaya. This are spillways and canals, flood control structures they're going to put in. So it's not just diversions, it's all kinds of structures all over the place. But they have a whole component of the plan that's called non-structural options. And what they mean by that, but they don't actually know what they mean by that. But what they really should be meaning by it, and this is one of the things that I have tried to beat them up along with 2 or 3 other members,
you need to start using 2 words, and the beginning letters of those words are P and R. What do you think those words are? Say again?
Public relations.
No. Planned retreat. You all are going to have to move. Sorry. You're going to have to move. Now, this is a big point of contention because there are people around who think they can engineer their way out of it. Okay? So that's one of my personal vendettas here. So there's a whole socioeconomic update, and they show us the whole complicated way and stuff. But and so they've talked. This is a consultant, again, Rand Corporation, to talk about what the effect on the infrastructure and the businesses are going to be. They point out that, for example, that a lot of the businesses are in fact clustered. Here's the New Orleans area here. They're clustered in these Morgan City. They're clustered along transportation routes and on high ground. So in fact, almost all the major areas where there are businesses are largely going to be okay, even in the 50 years from now. Okay? Now there's some good news with that. But they went on to say then, here's what's going to happen with all of that. Residential, non-residential, value of assets at risk. They go on to say that it's a bigger problem than just Louisiana. Now the Rand Corporation, is still talking about this with respect to storm flooding, not just sea level rise. Increases in storm damage, so on and so forth. And they point out that Louisiana is important to the rest of the world and the country for a variety of reasons. Okay, so that's the plan. And it's coming along. We are having our last meeting in December of the Science and Engineering Board, and we'll have a draft of the plan in front of us, and we'll give our last input to the document that comes out in April 2017. And I have to say, it's a huge exercise, well-funded, lots of people doing lots of things, and they are, in fact, making some progress. So the good news is, they're planning. Heavens to Betsy. What a good idea. Good thing they had, right? They are using the best science they can get, and luckily, because of the unfortunate incident with Deepwater Horizon, they got lots of money. They're spending close to $1 billion on this planning process, okay, which is good, right? Sorry about the Deepwater Horizon, but it's good. And they are involving constituents and public. They were attentive to that in the beginning, and they're getting more and more attentive to it. Witness the fact they have a social science and 2 planners on their science and engineering board. Okay? We're constantly telling them that's a good idea. Now, what's the bad news? Well, their plan so far, as it talks about, they talk a lot about divergence, but as far as it talks about people, it doesn't talk about anybody moving anywhere. It talks about lifting houses up on stilts. And it doesn't talk at all, remember all the stuff about the infrastructure being affected? There's nothing in the plan about moving any infrastructure. Okay? Yet. It won't be in this plan. They're not talking much at all about planned retreat, and it's quite clear that they are not going to have enough money to do what they're planning on doing, even in the plan. Okay? That's the problem. Now, this is all a bigger problem than we think, because the timing is so uncertain on sea level rise. It's certain it's going to happen, but it's uncertain exactly what the rate of rise is going to be and when it's going to happen. Time frame is beyond political cycles, so no elected official has an incentive to do anything because they know they're not going to be here. This is this is not a problem in Louisiana, it's a problem everywhere. Right? We've never faced this challenge before. Remember the 10,000-year thing, right? We've never faced this challenge before, so we actually don't know what to do. We lack law and policy tools, and I heard you talked about the election. Some people don't believe any of this, right? Oh, goodness. I do a lot of international travel. Up until 2 weeks ago, people were just laughing. Now they're not laughing. Okay. Here, Mike, we will not defend all of our coastal areas. We won't even defend most of them. We'll try to do it for a while, but then we'll realize, in fact, we have to move. So what do we need to do? We need to provide for people and infrastructure to move. There the question becomes, once you decide you're going to move New York City, where do you move it? To? How big do you make it? I'll tell you my theory, it's the Orbach theory. That over the next couple of 100 years, coastal society will atomize. We will not reinvent big cities because the sea will continue to rise. And we'll realize that we're going to have to adapt continually over the next several hundred years. We'll make smaller, more agile, more sustainable, environmentally friendly places to live and work. Orbach theory, you heard it here first. Now, I think one of the biggest problems is going to be what we do with inundated, abandoned infrastructure. So when the city of Houston is flooded, are we going to take it apart? When Balboa Island, where I grew up, is underwater, are we going to take all the buildings down and empty all the gas tanks that are underground? When lower Manhattan is really lower than sea level, what are we going to do with lower Manhattan? There will be almost no incentive for anybody to do anything. And it would be hugely expensive to do that. So prove that is great. But we should also, finally, begin to plan for this movement of natural infrastructure. A major way we can do that these days is we are so good at this time with GIS and all those planning tools and things. We know where these areas are going to want to move in the future. And many of these areas are currently not developed. We need to try and keep them undeveloped so that natural infrastructure can move into those places. That's going to be a significant challenge. Now, back to the Netherlands, the most defended country in the world. They have a new plan. I encourage you all to Google Netherlands New Water Plan. And it's called Living with Water. They are going to abandon almost 20% of their polder area, those areas that were created after they built the dikes, because they realize that as good as they are at engineering, they are not going to be able to defend what they have. And they're going to give it up. They're going to retreat. This is a planned retreat plan. This quote is from a talk given by their ambassador to the United Nations about this new plan that came out 2 years ago. I encourage you to look at this plan, because it's the kind of plan we're all going to have at some point. Thank you very much. The questions, comments?
Can I just start with one question about, you showed the high plan with the diversion and it didn't do anything. And you said that was about 50% of what is likely. So I guess my two questions are they going to end up doing the diversions and then in 20 or 30 years realizing that it's wasted a couple $1 billion?
Well, we, the Science and Engineering Board, have really, we have been able to spend a lot of time with the core planning group and their chief scientists. And we brought this up consistently. And what they say is, look, we understand that. But in fact, people have to live in the meantime as life goes on. And so in fact, even if this only saves some stuff for some amount of time, we're going to go ahead and do it now. We realize that in the end, I mean, their own projections show what it's going to be like in the end. But they say, people want us to do something to help them out now. Even people from Grand Isle or from Baie-la-Fouche or the places in the South Louisiana, they say, look, we know we're going to have to move. Help us decide where we should move and how long we're going to be able to stay there. We don't want to move to Iowa, we want to stay in Louisiana. How can we adapt? More and more communities are now saying, help us to figure this out. They're stopping to say, wow, maybe we can defend for a while, but we have to have a longer-term plan. So this is the, I actually got into this in Santa Cruz here because Gary Griggs from the Institute up there and I gave a talk about this kind of thing. And there was a bond issue up in June to have money to renovate the libraries, including the downtown library in Santa Cruz.
Well, some very well-meaning people who were at the talk wrote a letter to the newspaper saying, we just went to this great talk at UC Santa Cruz and it's going to be underwater. Why should we spend any money renovating the library? And I had to write a letter, which I did, led to the editor, which they published right away before the vote. They said, folks, look, we believe all of this is what we told you here, but in fact, we're going to be living here for several decades, at least in this area, before any of this really starts to take effect seriously. It'd be nice if people could go to the library for the next couple of decades. Right? Similar sort of. Other things? Yes?
So I know in the City of New Orleans resiliency plan, there's a similar type of this living with water plan. And I think it's around maybe $10 to $12 billion. Do you think that there's a possibility that they can fund it? So far, I've only seen like small bioswale type of projects that have come in.
Well, again, this is the big question about the money.
Okay.
You know, had the Deepwater Horizon not happened, it's not clear this plan would be happening. Right, because that's where the money came from to do all of this stuff. I mean, not just, before you even get to the diversions, the state wouldn't spend $1 billion on the planning process without having to be able to get that from somewhere else. It's hard to know, you know, I mean, the Ninth Ward, Lower Ninth Ward is a classic case where, as in many parts of Mississippi, there was an attempt made to buy landowners out
Yeah.
of those areas. And, you know, we tell them what the history of that.
Yeah, they, after Katrina, okay, so the Ninth Ward is typically people of color and people of lower income, and after Katrina, affluent people came in and tried to buy that land out.
And it's a very low area. It's where the big levee break hurt the
Right,
most.
sorry. And they tried to buy that area out to let it return to its natural state, and you know, there is a social uproar because you were moving the poorest people in the city. You were making them, you know, move somewhere else while you were rebuilding all of the more affluent neighborhoods. So there was a big social pushback in it. Yeah.
And that tendency spills over into what areas to defend and how much, and you know, where do you put new barriers in, where do you repair the old barriers. There's a huge amount. I mean, a lot of things were fixed in the sense of repair of existing infrastructure after Katrina, but there's a lot more that's in need of upgrading repair as well. And the question is which of that you're going to do and which you aren't. It's a scarce resource problem at some level. My guess is the plan you're talking about, or whether they want to do in the town,
Right.
I would guess they could probably find the money to do 10 or 20% of it. But I don't think much more than that. Other things, yes?
Is there a way you could use the sea level rise to your advantage? Like, I don't know, theoretically, if you built...
You buy land 10 miles from the ocean real fast? No.
Well, like, I don't know, just, this is crazy, but theoretically, maybe if you had a select city like New York and you built kind of a wall around the whole area and then just used it as like hydroelectric power, using, kind of damming it off and controlling it that way. But, I mean, it's crazy.
Well, there are, you know, San Francisco, the world of architecture, when somebody wants a creative building built, they sometimes do what they call design competition, where they invite architecture firms to bid on the creative thing. San Francisco did a design competition for adapting San Francisco to sea level rise, and it came up with some very interesting proposals. If you just Google that term, San Francisco Sea Level Rise Design Competition, you'll see the results of some of them are really wacky. And basically none of them said move, which was unfortunate. But you know, a reporter from the New York Times called me, must have been 2 years ago, and asked me essentially the same, they talked about this kind of thing. And she said, isn't this an opportunity to reinvent our coastal infrastructure, wherever it is, in a more sustainable way? And I said, absolutely. I can make the argument that this will be a tremendous economic boom, because I gave a similar talk to the International Society of Civil Engineers. And at first, and it was a big meeting, it was St. John's, Newfoundland, and the engineers were all there, and they went, oh wow, we haven't heard about this, this was 5-7 years ago. We haven't heard about this, but there were enough scientists in the room that got up and said, yeah, that's probably right. And all of a sudden the engineers went, you mean we get to move New York City? They were just got into this right away. I swamped in the bar that night saying, whatever is going to go first? You know? So we can look at this as an opportunity, absolutely. But we have to look at it that way. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be the iceberg thing. You know, icebergs roll slowly and then they roll fast.
Yep.
I think that's what's going to happen with this. It's going to roll real slowly until water gets up between 2 and 3 feet. And people are going to go, holy crap. Now we really have to do something. Now, the problem is that's going to be too late for a lot of things. It'd be nice if we could start earlier. Yes?
So talking about the Dutch, there's an organization, EcoShape, heard of it, but they did a project in Indonesia, where there's an area that was heavily used for aquaculture, and so their land was just completely destroyed, and with increasing sort of storm surges, these small little villages were severely being affected, and so they came up with ways to sort of regrow the mangroves. Which is obviously important, but at the same time, I mean, I know you say we have to continue living until, you know, I guess you have to move. But wouldn't you think that with smaller areas, smaller villages such as that, I mean, yes, there's obviously a cultural aspect to it, but trying to find places where these small, like if you're already gonna put the resources and the money into these small projects, would you not rather just try and find, sort of start with retreat with small areas like that instead of trying to regrow the area when it probably won't really be there?
Yes, and I mean, that's a priorities choice. Where do you prioritize where the money goes to? One of the problems with the social justice, environmental justice people point out is that climate change may affect the poorest people most. Now, I don't know if I totally buy that, because in some ways, in some places, poor people without large infrastructure investment are much more mobile than is Manhattan, right? And so in fact, it may be a lot easier to move some low capital populations to new areas than it is to move the high capital populations, right? So that's kind of one issue. And I do think, as a matter of real politics, when I give talks like this around the country, if I'm in a town of under about 1 million, I say, you know, y'all better figure this out in the next 10 or 20 years, because by that time, when people realize what's going to happen, there's going to be a large sucking sound of money to the large metropolitan areas. They're going to try to save New York and San Francisco and Houston. They're not going to try to save Port Lucie, Florida, or Monterey, for that matter. So there's a lot of that goes on, and there are larger issues if you get back to the international arena. I mean, look at Bangladesh. Bangladesh, there are probably 3-4 million people at least who are going to be seriously in harm's way with nowhere to go. Now, wait, excuse me. There's a lot of places to go, but nobody wants to let them into those places, right? Into Pakistan or Myanmar or India, the adjacent countries there. Another variant of that is the Pacific Islands, which are a very interesting case, the Atoll Islands, many of which were the Federated States of Micronesia. The whole country may seriously disappear in 50 years. And in fact, I'm engaged with a friend in a project with Tuvalu right now, where Tuvalu just got $100 million from one of the GEF, Global Environmental Facility. And people were hoping that they would use it for a transition plan to move their populations, and they already purchased property, some of them in New Zealand, in this case. But they have now said they're going to use it all to build infrastructure to defend Tuvalu. And I'm trying to get a lot of the international environmental groups on it, is to say, look, I mean, one of the problems is this is not going to work. But the other thing is you're going to screw up your natural environment by doing that. The coral reefs that they have left will be totally obliterated by bulkheads all over the place if they truly try to defend. And if people give them all this money, I actually, with this friend, wrote a nasty letter to the GEF and said, why are you funding this kind of stuff? You know? So, it's a long answer. Yes?
You had mentioned that it would be a really good idea for us to prevent further development in coastal areas, you know, in wetlands or even in areas that just haven't been developed yet. And I was wondering how we would go about accomplishing that, and then also for the things that are already built in those areas, is there anything kind of in motion that you're aware of to kind of prevent people from building more in those areas or maybe moving into houses that are at risk?
Yeah, there's a totally historic and available way to do that. You know the Nature Conservancy?
Yes.
This is what the Nature Conservancy was to start to do, is to actually not say we're going to regulate you and say what you can do with your land, but buy the land, right? And so you can have a different plan for the land. There are environmental easements, conservation easements, when there are conservation easements. A lot of the land I'm talking about where the marshes will clearly try to move as sea level rises, you could buy them and say this is future marsh. You could have the land, try to convince landowners to give you conservation easement on those lands. So yes, that's one of the areas of law and policy where there is an available set of tools to do it if there's the political will and the money. I've tried to talk Nature Conservancy. Nature Conservancy is spending, and I love Nature Conservancy, but they're spending piles of money trying to reconstruct and protect marshes, French marshes, that are clearly going to be totally underwater in 30 or 40 years. That is totally wasted money. Well, it's not wasted money in the sense that it gives you environmental value for a while. But I've tried to say, take some of that money and buy the upland area. And they haven't done it yet. They haven't quite, but those tools are there. It's a good question. Those tools are there. Yeah, in the back.
I've been reading reports from the Department of Defense and intelligence agencies that they're starting to frame climate change as a security concern. So you brought up Bangladesh. Do you agree with them that it could lead to like instability and major security concerns?
Totally. I'll tell you a funny story about this. Judy, where's Judy? My wife Judy and I are here. But when I was director of the Duke Lab, well, even afterwards, you know, Duke has an alumni association, and they do these tours for alumni, like a small cruise ships and stuff like that. And I like to have faculty members go along and give lectures and things. Judy was actually hired as a social director. I mean, they were beautiful trips. We did Tahiti twice. But on one of these trips, the Baltic Sea, and these are people with sort of means, right? And when I was giving these lectures on climate change, I could tell, especially, no offense, men, a lot of the older men were kind of frowning as I was saying some of this stuff, and they were blah, 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 blah. And so, at the end of the talk, there was question and answer, and I sort of freewheeled it, and I said, you know, I bet there are some people in this audience who really don't believe any of this. And I said, what do you think the organization is in the United States that is taking climate change, and particularly sea level rise, most seriously and has the best planning going on? And people said, oh, EPA or the Sierra Club. What is it? It's the Department of Defense. Absolutely. And you know, there was this kind of, and I said, now I'll bet some of you know generals or admirals. And so you go buy your favorite general, admiral, and drink and ask them if that's true or not. And there was a lot of conversation about that exchange after the talk. So yes, they're taking it entirely seriously.
Do you think environmental organizations could use that to their advantage to convince the unconvinced?
I'm on the board of directors of Ocean Conservancy, and I'll tell you, we talk about it a lot. We talk about it a lot. Think about it, the Ocean Conservancy is interesting, and I'm not trying to sell to anybody, but we are one of the environmental organizations who reaches out most to government and industry, right? We try to say, look, let's partner on things to make progress here. And we get a lot of trouble for that from some people because, you know, we're working with Coca-Cola and Dow Chemical and the Defense Department, right? And we think you can do some productive things doing that you actually couldn't do otherwise. So I think some of them are, and some of us are trying to convince them to do more. You know, when I was in North Carolina, I had the dubious distinction of having appointments from both Democrat and Republican governors. And I don't know why that is, but anyway. Under the Republican governor, I was the chairman of something called the Marine Science Council, the governor's advisory body on coastal issues. And I looked around and realized that a quarter of the coast in North Carolina was military reservation. And there was no military representation on this council, the governor appointed council. And so I went to the governor and I said, well, I think we ought to have I know some military people in that. And boy, some of the other council members, the Enviros, no offense, I'm an Enviro, raised holy hell. They said, no, they're the bad guys, or this and that. And I said, well, I don't think that's true. So I convinced the governor, and he appointed the head of the environmental sections of Camp Lejeune, which is the Air Force air base, and what's the other thing? Fort Bragg, to be on the council. And they were both colonels, full-bird colonels, and they were the best representatives, and they were smart, they were progressive. One of them ended up doing a single-stream waste program for the adjacent town where a lot of the people on the base live. So I think that is a totally good bet and a place to go. We just need to convince more people to do it. Yeah.
I was surprised by what you had to say about Houston, and so it got me thinking, let's take the worst case, let's just say 2-3 meters. How much land are we talking about losing as a percentage, and is there a lot of farmland that's going? Is there a lot of contamination of fresh water supplies?
You talking about Houston?
I'm talking about in general, so we think about the coasts, but how many other areas would be impacted? Are we talking about farmland in the Midwest potentially, for whatever reason, because it's actually lower than we'd expect?
Well, eventually, you are going to start seeing that through the back rub of the hydrological pressure up the Mississippi River. So eventually, you are going to see that as well. And there'll be two forces. One will be the kind of backup of the water coming from the Mississippi from sea level rise, and it'll create more resistance to water coming down. And then if you have more intense storms as well, you're going to have more water that's trying to get down. And so that'll cause a problem and squash in the middle. And I don't know what the percentage is of the U.S. that would be impacted by 2 meters of sea level rise. You can get that online. So there are a lot of visualizations of this.
Okay.
But it's primarily a coastal issue. For example, the Great Lakes are not really going to be affected by sea level rise at all, because they can control that through the lock system of the river. It's completely closed off from free flow of water from the ocean. Okay. Yes, yes.
I was thinking Miami City, where the mayor was on the news saying they were spending, I think, $1 billion for pumps to buy them 50 years.
Is it New Orleans?
No, Miami.
Oh, Miami, that's right.
The mayor, and anyway, I don't know what kind of planning went into that. The planning diagram you put up there, the first one, it scared me half to death. I don't think Miami did anything. I think they just decided to build pumps. I don't know.
Well, Dade County, Broward County, and Miami had a joint planning task force, and they have a great report, which I would commend all of you, that describes the problem. Now, they have no solutions in the plan, but the mayor of South Miami Beach, by the way, who is a biologist by training, has come out and said, I know this South Miami Beach is not going to be here forever. At some point, we are going to have to move. He's a very progressive guy, interesting guy. So that plan is a great plan, but it's not a plan, it's just a description of the problem. Right? Now, Miami has, it's not only low, it's not only coastal, but it's on this porous coraline platform. And so bulkheads won't help, because water will simply go around and under them to behind them. Pumps will get them along for a while, probably up to about 1 meter. They could probably deal with some, we can't even do it with all of Miami. They could deal with parts of Miami with pumps up to about 1 meter. And after that, it's curtains.
They're building the sidewalks 2 feet higher now.
Yeah, they're trying to do that now.
And they're building some roads 4 feet higher. And I saw the same interview, and then the last question was, how long is that going to buy you? And he goes, maybe 40 years.
Yeah, that's about right.
And they're spending a lot of money.
Yeah, that's
just
about
so they can live there a little longer.
Yeah, and that's what you're going to see happening. Now, my concern as an environmentalist, which I consider myself, is how much of the environment are we going to screw up by trying to defend before we realize we should just really plan. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Regarding the plan retreat thing, and I know you mentioned it too, that one of the challenges is the political will. Is that the reason why it wasn't in the previous plan for Louisiana? Or you mentioned that it wasn't in it, and that you hope that it's in it in the future? Or is it a complex set of factors? Or maybe people just didn't consider it until now?
Well, I think it's 70%, 20%. I think it's 70-30. The 30% is that they don't have enough science and modeling capability to really think about all the things they need to think about. And they're developing that over time. But the other 70% is that under Bobby Jindal, he didn't want to hear about any of it. Right? I mean, he wanted to fix what happened in Katrina and then move on. You know, he didn't want to hear any of this stuff. So luckily, the legislature had the good sense, and now they're a good governor. But yeah, even now, you know, we the board talk to the staff in these closed meetings and say, y'all are really going to have to start talking about plant and tree here. And I don't think that word is currently mentioned in this new plan. Although every meeting we've told them they ought to start mentioning it. And we may, after this next meeting in December, get it in there in a couple of places as a mention. Okay. But this is part of the it's never happened before problem. That it's hard to get on people's radar with things that have never happened to them before, that are really certain to happen, but the timing's uncertain. Okay? That is a big political push to do that. Now the good news is the more information and these visualizations are great. One of our graduate students at Duke have you seen the Sync My City? There's Google Sync My City. He made a simple program you can do on your smartphone that you can, for most major cities, you can put your city in it and watch the sea level rise as a visual, like Google Earth. Right? It's very cool, actually. So as we get more tools like that, and we can show people, it's one of our recommendations, by the way, in the next outreach version here, is get those Google Earth people down here and show them what Morgan City looks like from street level, visually, with 1, 2, and 3 meters of sea level rise. Right? The more we do that, the more people, you know, their immediate reaction is, oh, God, that's depressing, or really, or how do you know that? Blah, blah, blah. But more and more they're saying, oh man, help us. What are we going to do about this? So the political will has been a significant problem in many areas. Yes?
If the Greenland ice cap melts completely, is that going to be 30 feet or 30 meters of sea level?
No, I think the Greenland ice cap is predicted at 20 feet, which is 6 meters.
That's it, that's the whole thing?
No, yeah, 6 meters.
6 meters.
Yeah, that will contribute 6 meters to relative sea level rise.
Are you familiar at all with a fellow named Guy McPherson, who used to be a professor at the University of Arizona? And he has a website now called Nature Bats Last.
No, I don't.
Okay.
You don't have Jason?
No.
No.
I do. He's a whack.
On that next question.
Yeah, he spoke at Seaside about 4 or 5 months ago, and it was a farce. He's alarmed.
Yeah. Let's get the three last ones here. I think we're running out of time here.
Let me say one more thing to this. You know, one of the things that I run into when I talk about this is people who, you might call them climate science deniers, one thing or the other. And one of the things they would say is, oh, well, this is all modeling, and you know how models can go right or wrong. That's why in my talks, what I try to do is use only empirical data. Only data from satellites or exact record, or data from tide charts. And you can get enough of the picture without any models at all to do that. And I understand that because, you know, I used to be a modeler. That's why I'm a cultural anthropologist. Models are as good as what you put into them and the assumptions you make and the way you structure the model. And I know that. But, so I try to depend myself mostly on empirical evidence as opposed to modeling. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is there any research that has been done in terms of sea level rise and fish populations? I'm thinking like when the ships sink, when you have a wreck, creates some kind of like micro ecosystem and that attracts fish and sharks. I'm assuming all the houses and the buildings that will go underwater, some of them, most of them won't be removed.
That is a great question. So let me address it in a couple ways. It is certainly possible to create fish habitat artificially. And the best example of this are oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, which are great fish habitat. And in fact, the recreational fishermen and commercial fishermen used to gripe about these things all the time. And the official Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act progression says you have to have a decommissioning plan to take all this stuff out when the field stops producing. Those groups are all lobbying against that provision now, saying leave them there. Right? Now, the problem is, it's not clear in most cases whether there are more fish or the fish are just aggregating around those structures and making it easier to catch them. Right? Now, on the other hand, if there's a lot more habitat that corals and seagrasses and barnacles can attach to, that may be a lot more interesting habitat that would produce more fish in some places. Absolutely. Absolutely. The big thing that's happening with fish populations, there are a couple big things happening with fish populations. One is that the temperate species are all moving north, right? So croakers on the East Coast, their distribution, you can see this in the fish catch data, used to be mid-Atlantic up to about New Jersey, and now they're going up to Maine, right? There are people who worry that lobsters are going to move out of the Gulf of Maine and there won't be a lobster fish in the Gulf of Maine anymore because of warming temperatures. So basically, temperate fish populations are moving toward the poles as the water warms. You may see salmon fisheries north of Bering Strait at some point, for example, right? But given habitat, things like that. So the second thing are corals. Now, corals are not big spatially, but they're big in terms of productivity. And the question is, as sea level rise, will corals be able to either survive less light and warmer temperatures because of increased depth, and how can they adapt to that? It's not clear. You find varying opinions about that. One answer is that different species adapt to different things at different levels, but that's kind of unclear. The third thing is acidification. And this affects mostly the shell-building organisms. And that's clearly going to be a serious problem with no obvious solution. Yeah. Is that some of those species, just, and that includes corals, by the way, just may not survive in the long run in an evolutionary sense because of acidification. But that's a great question. Yes?
I was wondering if you could address how sea level rise will impact access to fresh water. And so people can move, right? But if they don't have access to water, then it will make it difficult for them to survive. And even in areas that aren't underwater, you have phenomena like saltwater intrusion, which can contaminate freshwater sources.
Right. Don't get me started on water policy in California. So in the one sense, well, here in Monterey Bay, you probably know there's saltwater intrusion into the aquifers in Watsonville and South Santa Cruz up to SoCal, right? And that's largely because of extractions from mackerels, right? So those kinds of things happen. As sea level rise, there would be you predict because of head pressure and all kinds of things, more saltwater intrusion. But that's for places that rely on their local freshwater resources, particularly groundwater resources. But, you know, look at Los Angeles. Did you see the movie Chinatown? Did you see the movie Chinatown? Right. Chinatown is about water policy, actually. So what we do in California is we drag water from the east of the Rockies across a desert in open aqueducts to water lawns in another desert in Los Angeles, and then we throw it away after we use it once. Who would design a system like that to do anything, right? The problem is we do it on a big scale. There are interbasin transfer. One of the things I'm for as environmentalist is no interbasin transfers. Stop interbasin water transfers. Right? Now, I think about it mostly because of environmental. But it's enabled population and distributions to be what they are. So part of the answer to your question is that people will likely, in many places, not be able to rely on their traditional groundwater resources. But the real question in the end is how we do water distribution in the long run.
That's the question.
From the poetic to the prosaic, I was interested in the role of the oil industry in Louisiana, in this master plan. I mean, they have a very high level of assets exposed even now, and I just wonder where they come in politically, especially given the recent shift in political culture in this country, because, you know, they are going to, you know, are they planning, are they involved with the government, and what kind of role are they taking?
Yeah, that is a great question to end on, because it's a very interesting story to tell. Sure. The oil industry is incredibly pervasive in South Louisiana. It's arguable that their channelization, their extraction, their infrastructure development have done significant destruction to the state of Louisiana. On the other hand, they provided lots of revenue and lots of jobs for a long time. Now, we have talked to the oil industry, and we've talked to them in the sense of, one of the things I said is they're not planning about their infrastructure yet in this plan. So when we start to have conversation about the infrastructure, the oil industry naturally comes up. And the planning people in Louisiana said, the oil industry has said to us, don't worry about us, we've got plans. And their plans are removed. Yeah, their plans are removed. Yeah. So Port Fouchon will not be there. The question is somebody going to take it apart before they land? Yeah, Port Fouchon is down there. So that's a great question. Like the military, the oil industry's got a plan. And they said, we don't want the government tell us what we should do. We get it here. We've got our plan. You just give us how. Yeah.
Where's their plan retreat?
Well, they haven't told us. Yeah, they haven't told us that. Well, thank you guys very much.